is Laura Sant now, but it was Laura Carthy, and Laura is going to run through the various aspects of what the government has announced in relation to directors of limited companies, and then we will be able to take questions and answers at the end of Laura's presentation. We also have a number of our team also on hand, both Edith Woodward and Andrew Brown. And at the end of the presentation, I shall be marshalling the question and answer session, and I will direct the questions to one of those three to respond to. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Laura to run through the slides with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sally. I'm going to start with a bit of an apology. As we all know, we're on lockdown, and actually the bin lorries just turned up on my street. So I do apologise for any background noise. Whilst I'm apologising for any background noise, my husband is currently looking after our two children, who are 3 and 18 months. So I do apologise, but there is a possibility if they get loose that we might have brief interruptions. So before we start the webinar, I just wanted to point out, so we've run two, but this is our second webinar that we've run, and this one is focused, as Sally said, towards directors of limited companies. For those who are sole traders or in a partnership, the relevant webinar for you was actually yesterday's webinar, and we have got that recorded. So whether you're a client of ours or not, if you would like to see a copy of the recording, then please just let us know. For our clients, we will be sending that out to you shortly, along with the question and answers from yesterday. But I will not be offended if anybody were to choose to leave the webinar at this stage, because it doesn't necessarily apply to them. I think the only other say apology but forewarning is obviously this is the second webinar that we've ever run as a company, so please do bear with us if anything goes wrong technologically. Whilst we have a number in our team who are excellent with technology, unfortunately anybody who had or has had the name Carthy, we don't belong to that group, I'm afraid. So in terms of the agenda for today, our main focus is going to be what we think is available to assist directors of limited companies and what unfortunately will not be available. It's worth pointing out that we seem to have a never-ending moving I don't know, it's a moving feast in terms of what is available or is not available. So there are things that we just don't know at the moment, but today is all about sharing what we do know. The main focus will be in terms of the employee and the self-employed support schemes that are available and why you may or may not be eligible for those, and focusing on the other government assistance that is available that may help to support you through this difficult time. I think it's important that we focus on how we can help you as well. For those of you who don't already have this as an idea in your head, with us being a business, we need our clients to survive this in order for us to be able to continue to run. So it's in our best interest that we help you wherever we can to get through this and work together, I suppose. And then finally we will open the floor up. I think this is probably going to be a slightly shorter presentation than yesterday's, so we should have plenty of time to answer some questions from the floor, from people who are watching. So for those of you who have either joined a short while ago, I believe the question and answer section or the bar is down at the bottom of the screen, and there's a Q&A button. If you post questions to that, it will go through to the panel. I'm not going to look at it until the end, but they can certainly have a look and do any digging that's needed. So we're going to start with the bad news, which is in terms of the self-employment income support scheme. Now, the majority of you are not going to be eligible for this, because this is for people who the government apparently consider to be self-employed, so those who are sole traders and those who are in partnerships, rather than those who are directors of limited companies. Now, according to the government, they anticipate that they covered over 95% of sole traders and partnerships with this scheme by setting the limit as annual trading profits being set, or kind of the maximum trading profits being at £50,000. And it kind of makes sense from that perspective, because the majority of people whose profits are in excess of £50,000 per year, they have a tendency to incorporate anyway. But I think what the government have therefore done is made the assumption that this is going to apply to all limited companies, and potentially are kind of putting some people in a less favourable position. I think the other thing that is probably just worth pointing out is that it seems like it's an ideal scenario for those who are self-employed on paper, but we don't know quite what the scheme will entail. So the wording on the government's website is that income must be lost as a result of COVID-19, and I can understand how people who are manual labourers, for example, and can't physically get out to undertake any work will be impacted and would be able to claim through this. However, for people and businesses who are providing services and therefore are maybe indirectly affected as a result of their customers ceasing to provide them with trade, it doesn't necessarily expand on how they would, or whether they would see any benefit from this. So the next consideration is the coronavirus job retention scheme. There is a possibility that some of you may be eligible for this. We are waiting for official confirmation to be published direct from the horse's mouth, as it were. There are conflicting opinions on this, but I think a number of sources now have suggested that it should be possible to furlough directors of limited companies, even where they are the sole directors and employees of the business. My understanding is that somebody directing from the Treasury has confirmed this. The downside is that in terms of this furloughing, it will only be to the extent of your salary. So dividends, those who pay themselves a salary and a dividend mix, the dividend side of things is not going to be counted towards your remuneration package for the consideration of this scheme. We also know that for employees in general, if you're going to furlough them, you effectively have to equivalently lay them off or make them redundant. They effectively can undertake no work for you. You can't just get them to work a reduced hours. And the same will apply for any directors that you're looking to furlough. So the only consideration that I believe has been made is that a director would be eligible to carry on with the statutory filing requirements that are required of a company. So, for example, we'll talk briefly about the VAT deferral scheme in a short while, but VAT returns are still going to need to be filed whilst the company is on shutdown. So these sorts of tasks are things that a director would still be able to do as we currently know it. I think the other thing that we kind of need to be aware of in terms of the continuity of service provision. So, for example, if you're a business service, a personal service company where you are effectively contracted to one place and you've been sent home, then hypothetically, yes, you might be in a position to furlough yourself. But for those who have got an ongoing business and have still got a number of clients to provide support to, you might need to kind of weigh up whether it is worth trying to furlough yourself or trying to keep going with your business. I appreciate for some they might feel that it's easier to just shut up shop until this thing's blown over. However, if your competitors aren't thinking about doing this and are adapting to this new world order, then there is kind of, I suppose, a fairly strong chance you're going to end up left behind, and some of your clients who wanted your support during this time, if you're not there willing to provide that service, the likelihood is they'll have gone elsewhere and looked elsewhere prior to you getting back on your feet. I think the other thing that's worth just pointing out, as I mentioned, it's a moving feast. There seems to be announcements on an almost daily basis, albeit there's not been any since last Thursday, or no major ones. most accountants, and I think most people, when Rishi Sunak started his briefing last Thursday to provide details of support for the self-employed, anticipated that he was going to be talking about both sole traders and directors of limited companies. When it became apparent that they weren't addressing directors, there was a bit of an uproar on social media from numerous regulatory boards and accountancy firms. And there's been suggestions, whether they're true or not, that there may be further announcements in this regards in the future. But for the meantime, it's worth considering other options that are available to you. Just as a quick heads up for those who, especially for those who've got employees, but people who potentially are considering furloughing themselves as directors, we're going to be running a webinar later in the week in conjunction with Kevin Murphy of Employment Law Solutions to discuss both the HR and the financial considerations of the job retention scheme in more detail and the practicalities associated with it. We've just got to confirm when that's going to be, and then we will be dropping out invites to people. If you are not a client and would like to be invited to that, please just feel free to either drop myself or our client services team an email after this session is finished, and we can make sure that you get sent an invite. So in terms of the job retention scheme, and in terms of what you can expect to receive from the government if you were going to furlough yourself, and you have to remember that this is pre-tax and national insurance deductions. There's more practicalities to it, but it's just worth having a quick look at this to see approximately what you might be eligible to receive. So the first column talks or looks at those who are directors who are on the, what we'd say maybe is the standard director salary, which is that bracket that falls just below your national insurance threshold. So those individuals could be looking at a monthly grant of about £575. Those who are have taken the full personal allowance, so £12,500, the amount they would receive from the government, and that's for the business would receive it, that would then be processed through the payroll in order to pay over to you, would be £833.33. And I do know that we have a few clients who are directors who are salaried, so you can see the increasing amounts as you go along. Effectively, if your salary is above £37,500, that monthly grant amount in relation to your gross pay would be £2,500. It's just worth pointing out as well that this grant amount, as I say, it will be subject to tax and national insurance. It will also be subject to employers' national insurance and pension contributions as standard, but you can apply for a grant from the government to cover the employers' national insurance and pension contributions as well. Now, once again, this is a point where it's probably, if you are thinking of going down this route, it is probably worth checking into the webinar later on this week just to get a bit more information. I'm just going to check because there have been some chats that, okay, nothing in relation to me, so it's all good. We'll carry on. So we'll now look at some other support that is available from the government in order to support you through this time. So some of these schemes have been announced for a few weeks, which at the moment feels like an eternity. So I'm going to keep them relatively brief, and then hopefully we'll have a bit longer to talk about the specifics and some of the questions that people have. So in terms of VAT, HMRC have confirmed that there will be a deferral of any VAT payments that are due or have fallen due during the period of the 20th of March 2020 through to the 30th of June 2020. Now, just to confirm, this deferral is only for payments that were due during this period. So if, for example, you had a late payment that was outstanding, that was maybe due on the 7th of March, then that payment will still be due. It is also worth noting that it's a deferral only, and it will be due by the end of the 2020-2021 tax year. It's an automatic deferral, so you don't have to apply for it. But I think HMRC have been giving advice that if you should wish for this deferral to take place, it's worth cancelling your direct debit. Although once again, I understand that they're allegedly doing that themselves. I think it's worth pointing out that if your VAT return was in a refund position, then that will be issued as standard as well. And I suppose if you're one of the lucky ones where your business either hasn't been impacted at all, or you're actually in a more beneficial position as a result of this time, then because it's only a deferral, it's probably, if you can afford to make the payment, it is probably worth making that payment. I'll give you the example of what we're doing. We're deferring the payment, but we have the money put to one side, so we will only be using it in an absolute emergency. In terms of income tax, so in terms of your personal tax liabilities, the second payment on account, so the 31st of July payment, that has been deferred automatically again to the 31st of January 2021. As I say, it's automatic, you don't have to make any application to do that, and what some of you may find that just helps tide you through the next few months. HMRC have confirmed that there will be more leniency with regards to time to pay requests. However, because they normally will only agree to time to pay requests if they believe that there is a reasonable chance that they were going to get their money, there is likely to be more evidence required to be provided to them. And in terms of deferring payments, the other thing falls potentially slightly outside of the kind of the business side of things, but in terms of loan repayment holidays, so the government have confirmed that people can have personal mortgage holidays for 3 months as things currently stand, and they're also offering protection from eviction for commercial tenants for 3 months. It's worth noting that's not a rental holiday, it's still going to be due rather than spreading it over the course, but landlords won't be able to evict individuals short term if they are struggling to pay their rent as a result of COVID-19. In terms of other schemes that are there to support you through the pandemic, so there is the Small Business Grant Scheme, and that is £10,000 for those eligible for small business or rural or tapered rate relief. And from that perspective, that is for companies that have properties as at the 11th of March 2020. Say it's got to be occupy a property, be eligible for the small business rates relief, and be based in England. My understanding is that local authorities have now written to people to let them know that they believe they are eligible and to invite them to apply for the scheme. Unfortunately, I would imagine they've probably written to the office address where most people are probably not able to get to. So I certainly know from a Staffordshire perspective, the website is now up and you are able to make that application if anybody is in a position to do so. In terms of the retail, hospitality and leisure businesses, there is up to a £25,000 grant per property. So for those whose business property has a rateable value of £15,000 or less, that grant is the same as the Small Business Grant Scheme, so £10,000 is the maximum that you'd be eligible for. But for those with properties of rateable values of £15,000 to £51,000, then hypothetically you are eligible to apply for a £25,000 grant, and my understanding is that is per property. There's also the rates holiday for those in the retail, hospitality and leisure businesses for amounts up to 51, rateable values of up to £51,000. Now, in terms of support for employees, government's obviously said for employees that if you are ill as a result of COVID-19, that you can claim statutory sick pay from day 1 rather than day 4. And from an employer's perspective, you can claim 14 days statutory sick pay back from the government per employee. Obviously, this is only applicable if you are ill or if you are in self-isolation. There's also the coronavirus job retention scheme, and from that perspective, for employees, it's a lot more of a straightforward process. The big thing to be aware of is you have to furlough them, so you effectively have to lay them off for a period of at least 3 weeks straight, and the concept is that you'd effectively need to make them redundant if it were not for this scheme. They must not do any work for you during the period of furloughing, other than they can do a bit of training or a bit of volunteering work during that time. So the government, from that perspective, will pay up to £2,500 or 80% salary for staff who are furloughed for 3 months. So that's 3 months currently that they've agreed to, and that may be extended in due course depending on how long this goes on for. It's expected that this scheme should be up and running and available to apply for by the end of April. So it's you're possibly looking at into May before you'd be getting any physical cash coming through in order to support this process. I've obviously already mentioned the fact that we've got a webinar about it with a bit more detail about the logistical side of things. Potentially you could look at applying for an extension of universal credit. From that perspective, there's additional income being pumped into the universal credit system, but I think it's just worth being aware that the system's very busy at the moment. So it's not going to be, I think nothing is going to be straightforward at this precise moment in time. The business interruption loan schemes, my understanding is that now those schemes are up and running. In order to get anything from these loan schemes, you're going to need some up-to-date financial information. The likelihood is you're going to need your most recent set of accounts sorted. You're probably going to need management accounts up until the point that the coronavirus hit, and you're going to need to be providing details about the steps that you've taken to manage the economic downturn in terms of furloughing your team, looking to reduce costs, etc. And in terms of financial information provision and getting the information that you need, then that's definitely something that we can support with. The special thing about the business interruption loan schemes is that for 12 months the fees will be paid for and the interest will be paid for by the government. They'll assist in terms of guaranteeing some of the loan, but the fact is that loan will be responsible, or you'll have responsibility for that loan. The general feedback, albeit this was last week that we kind of liaised with other accountants and got this feedback, but the general feedback is to date is that in general lenders aren't lending for this criteria, and you may actually find that it's more simple to get assistance for regular financing options. Once again, we can provide some support with that. So in terms of where to now, for once, and those of you who are clients will know that when we have account sign-off meetings at the end of the year, we ask how the business is going. And normally the answer is really busy. I'd like to make some changes. I'd like to make some improvements, but I've just not got time. So for once, some of you may actually have some time to work on the business if we look at the positives, especially if you're not able to work in the business. Perhaps there's the ability for you to adapt to the new circumstances and some novel opportunities for you to take advantage of. So for example, I do know we have certain clients who have transportation, and normally they would transport a particular type of material that they no longer can do because that's not required and it's not a key service at this precise moment in time. However, they're adapting and they are going to be transporting medical supplies and oxygen for the NHS and the government during this time. For those of you that maybe can't adapt, then you can spend some time planning for your return, maybe getting some promotion for when you're back up and running. And whilst it's not really got very much to do with the business, I suppose if you're bored and stuck at home, it might be worth considering whether you can do any volunteering or temporary work at supermarkets or providing some support to the NHS. during this time. So as I mentioned at the start, we need our clients, and we want our clients to survive this. So we want to provide help and guidance and support wherever we can. I do think there are a few people on this webinar today who are not clients. If you're not clients, please do speak to your accountants about what they're going to do to support you and how they can support you. And if they're not in a position to provide that assistance, then feel free to speak to us, because we'll quite happily assist people during this time. I think from that perspective, we have to remember we're a business and we have 16 members of our team that we want to continue paying so that they can carry on providing you with the level of service that you need. But equally, I think at this precise moment in time, we're not looking to profiteer from this. We'll offer as good a rates as we can to get you what you need to get you through this. So in terms of the things that we can do to help you during this time, we can assist with calculations that will be needed for the necessary applications for any grants and finances that you need. We can help with the furlough payroll process. This will, so effectively, I think you're going to need to make applications when you're furloughing people to claim that money back from the government. Even if you're doing your own payroll, if you need some support with that process, then we are happy to assist. For those who it's not going to be relevant for today's audience, but if you are aware of anybody who needs their 18-19 tax return completing because they're self-employed and they want to claim this self-employment income support scheme, we've got capacity at the moment that we can provide support with that. And then I think this is something that Rupert will be covering off in more detail. The plan was to do a webinar this week, but as Sally said, he's not brilliantly well at the moment. So the hope and the anticipation is that will be for next week, about continuity business planning. And it's in regards to what else can you be doing, and as I say, trying to come out the other end stronger, as well as cash flow planning. If it's going to be a short-term cash poor situation, what can you be doing to keep going, really, until we get out the other side of this pandemic. So I think that's everything that I was going to cover today. So I think we're going to now pass over to Sally to go through some questions and answers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Laura. I just have a couple of bits on the presentation, if I can, Laura. One element that Laura didn't cover as part of the VAT situation is, whilst you can defer payment, you have to make sure that your VAT return is submitted. There is no leverage at all for not submitting the VAT return, so please make sure that you get that put in.
I would like to point out, Sally, that I did actually mention that. You obviously were not listening, but I didn't mention it at the relevant point. I do apologise. Okay,
thank you. And the other thing is just on the loan situation. We're part of a networking group of accountants across the country, and we've been on a call this morning, and apparently NatWest have notified the world today that they have now been asked by the bank to reconsider every loan they have already approved. So I think although the government made the announcement that they wanted to help people and the banks needed to help people, the banks are now acting like banks and starting to question whether or not making the loans is the appropriate thing to do. So I think other banks may follow that. So just keep an eye on that and whether you need to go down to the more traditional routes of funding. We have had 21 questions so far on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen that we need to go through, and I also had some sent in advance. I think what I would say to you is these questions are really, really important, because the answer, one person might have asked the question, but the answer may be relevant to all of you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start going through them now, and I'm going to direct it to either Andrew Brown, Edith Woodward, or Laura herself. I'd also like to say that Andrew doesn't have his picture on there, but I can assure you he's a jolly handsome young man. So on that point, I'm just going to, Rob actually put a question on chat, so I've extracted that, and I'm going to direct this one to Edith. Edith, Rob's asked, can furloughed employees still take part in team calls so they're kept up to date with what's going on in the business?
Thank you, Sally. And so, Rob, the instruction about furloughed staff is that they can do training, but they're not meant to do any work or services for their employer. Now, it's whether you're going to classify that team meeting as a training session or not. That would be your decision to make. But be aware that they are being very closely monitored in terms of any fraudulent transactions that are going on. So I would be suggesting that as long as it's training, it would be okay. But outside of the training concept, probably not the best idea to have if you're going to furlough your staff.
Thank you very much. And again, just on furloughing, Edith, Mike has asked that he notes the furlough period is for a minimum of 3 weeks. Does this have to be consecutive weeks, or can the weeks be split across the period?
So furloughing is a 3-week minimum period, and it's not a splitting situation. So it is a case of 3 weeks, and then you can be reinstated as a standard employee, for lack of a better expression. They could end up working for a day or two and then being furloughed again, or you can have a 3-week furlough period and immediately go into another 3-week furlough period.
Brilliant. And I think this might be the last one on furloughed employees, Edith, so bear with me. The question comes from Steve. And so, can company directors furlough as well as employees? His son worked with him until November. And he's been recently made redundant from a job in Canada and may be returning. So would they be able to claim anything for him if he starts work again? And what grants would he be entitled to, if any?
So in terms of the furloughing employees, it's those that are employed as of the 28th of February. So unfortunately, Steve, with your son not being classed as an employee on the 28th of February, it would be a case that you wouldn't be able to furlough him. In terms of grants available, there wouldn't be any specifically for your son. He might be able to claim universal credits, depending on the rules in and outs of those. But unfortunately, he won't be able to be furloughed.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a question here, and it's from Mark, and I'll leave out the company name, but as the MD of X, I pay myself the minimum PAYE salary with the top up via monthly dividends. I've had to put out all staff on furlough as we have no business coming in, and it's likely no more for a few months. Is the best way to take advantage of the government staff retention scheme to change all of my income to PAYE?
Is that to myself, Sally? Sorry.
It's got the word furlough in, so I think it has to be.
That's fine. So from what we understand, and it will go through in more detail on the webinar about furloughing later in the week, but it'll be based on your salary from February, because you're a salaried member of staff. So therefore, there's no point suddenly trying to increase your salary now going forwards, because it's based on February's salary.
Thank you.
I think the other thing that's probably worth mentioning for anybody who thinks let's go back and amend February's figures, I would imagine that HMRC will be very hot on auditing those February figures, and will probably see through quite quickly anybody that's gone through and amended it just to take that higher figure.
There's a few come through with furloughing, but I'm not going to give those to you straight away, Edith, so you can take that gulp of water. I'm going to direct this one to Andrew, please. Nick has asked, from April, we've been told to go down to the 8632 amount for tax purposes. Should we now reverse this decision if we want to furlough? And sorry, I didn't realise furlough was in there, and get the full personal allowance amount?
Thanks, Sally. The 8632 is probably the NI limit for the upcoming 2021 tax year. As Edith just said, it won't have any impact on the furloughing or any job retention extra you may get. The decision to put you on that amount or the higher amount may differ as we go forwards. If it goes on for any longer than sort of 3 months or so, they may end up changing the numbers, but for the time being, it won't make a difference either way on that front.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to direct this to you as well, Andrew. It's quite a long question, so bear with me. I accept that we're in a state of flux as far as the government's advice help is concerned, but what existing measures can be used to help companies / directors at this time? Where I'm going with this is R&D tax credits. I'm sure a lot of us may have discounted this first time around, but with director owners of businesses not only looking to save their business, but perhaps develop at a time when they can be free to do this, then I'm seeing a lot of activity on LinkedIn in connection with this being not as onerous as I initially thought. Furthermore, it seems this can be backdated. Any thoughts?
It's an interesting one. There are plenty of R&D tax credits available out there. Quite a lot of them are actually quite easy to get. There's quite a lot of innovation grants coming out. The government want to encourage people to do research and development of their business. The one issue I could see with it, in terms of the grants, it's a very good idea. I would probably consider that working and that you weren't furloughing, because you're effectively developing something for your own business. So there might be people trying to say that you can have R&D, and whilst that is true, bear in mind that it may have an impact on the furloughing status of yourself. We do need clarification from the government on it, and there are a few things that go one way or the other. We're not too sure how that would impact it.
Thank you, Andrew. Again, I'd like to address this one to you, Andrew, and then I'll give you a chance to have some water. This is from George. Again, quite a long question. In your initial letter, you stated the government is currently being queried on this unbalanced approach, as it is an area of disparity between the rest of the self-employed and employed communities. Directors may naturally be looking for various work and making improvements to the business during this period of inactivity to assist when the business can start to trade again. This would be considered working and not qualify as furloughed using these current guidelines. There's not a question there. So I don't.
What George is asking, there is a bit of uncertainty, I guess is the word, regarding what is considered work and what is considered out of work. There's a lot of dispute, and accounting organisations as well as actual advisors to HMRC are querying this, and when there is more information on it, it will be concrete as to what it means. As far as we are currently aware, I would say personally that if it's a legal requirement, I don't think they could consider that work. So that includes submissions of VAT, tax, company's house. I can't imagine them calling that work. However, obviously raising sales invoices in a time where you are considered to go furlough is a no-no. Marketing is the questionable one. And if I was a director of my own limited company, I would be wanting to spend, as Laura mentioned, my off time dealing with the when the business can start trading again, to be in a position where it will be up and running much smoother. I may want to look to promote, I may look to want to develop. Where does the line get drawn for working? I think that's the bit where we need clarity from the government over. It's, like I say, I would personally say that anything legally requirement to do, being an admin or an office holder of the limited company, isn't really work. Anything above that could be deemed. But as soon as we have a little more information on that, straight from the horse's mouth, as Laura says, we'll let everyone know.
Lovely. This one to Laura from an anonymous attendee. If there is a service level agreement in place, what specific additional support is chargeable, please?
Well, I think it's I suppose to an extent we're not too sure at the moment in terms of what will be chargeable and how much it will be chargeable by. I think where the service level agreement is in place, we will attempt to do as much as we can within the scope of the service level agreement. I suppose, for example, if your service level agreement covered things like bookkeeping and all of a sudden the trade and the bank transactions has dried up, there might be more scope within the service level agreement to provide that additional support. But there are obviously certain things that we just couldn't have anticipated. I mean, who at the start of January thought this was where we would be at the end of March? So the furloughing process, for example, we don't know whether it's because they haven't got the scheme open yet, we don't know whether it's going to be a 2-minute process that we probably could manage to throw in, or whether it's going to be an extra 20 minutes work for our payroll team. If it's an extra 20 minutes work per client, that's actually quite a lot of additional work, and therefore there would need to be additional fees. I think the fact is we're going to have to be flexible with it, and as I say, we're genuinely not going to be trying to you know, rack in the money on this. It is going to be to cover our costs, because what you will probably find is a lot of our or some of our day-to-day work will dry up. There will be some people who might not need the support that they previously needed, and in order to keep the team working and providing the support ongoing, we need to ensure that we have the money to pay them.
Okay.
Does that answer the question, Sally?
It has. Edith, I'm going to take this because there's some links. So Nigel's posed the question. I'm going to give you 3 in one go here. Nigel's posed a question. So if you're a director but not an employee now, can you become an employee now and potentially furlough? Richard has said, how do we claim the furloughed payment and from where? And Joe has asked, what if you cannot pay for the payroll in advance of receiving the government fund?
So in terms of if you're not PAYE'd at the moment for the directors, I think that was Nigel's question, correct me if I'm wrong, Sally.
Yeah.
It's a case that if you weren't on a payroll at the 28th of February and paid around that time, then I don't believe under the current standards that you'll be able to actually furlough yourself as such, because you've not had a salary. Can I just confirm with Andrew that you're in agreement with that one?
I'd say that was how I'd see it, yep.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the second question, sorry Sally, there's too many in one go.
Oh, thank you. I'm just trying to get through this list. There's loads. Richard said, how do we claim the furloughed payment and from where?
Okay, so the furloughed payment is a situation where the calculation's done to work out what the furloughed payment actually is to pay your staff, that you have to pay them directly. Then you can make a claim from HMRC on an online portal, which actually doesn't exist yet. They're hoping to have it up and running by the end of April, but it'll be a submission application type thing done to HMRC through their portal, and then you'll get the money direct from HMRC.
And the final part of it was, what if you cannot pay payroll in advance of receiving government funding?
So the frustration part to this at the moment is that HMRC and the government's response to this is, if you haven't got the cash flow, is to review whether you can get one of these support loans that are available. But as we've already discussed, they're not the easiest to get hold of, and they're not necessarily the best option. What I would suggest, because I'm aware where that's come from, is I was planning on calling you at some point today anyway, Joe, so we can discuss that in a bit more detail specific to yourself. But in general, the guidance that you're given by the government is to apply for a loan, which feels a bit short-sighted in my opinion. There are other options. I would suggest anyone thinking about that to join the furlough webinar that we've got in conjunction with a HR specialist who actually was talking to me earlier today about this, but it's not my area of knowledge, so I don't really want to go into it. But I definitely recommend that once we've got that webinar up and running, and we'll get an invite sent out to you. So if you are interested, as Laura said, drop us an email and we'll get an invite sent out.
And it's important to let you know that we only have 100 places on our Zoom subscription for that. So as soon as you see the invite, I would suggest that one director from each company goes on that, because it will be quite limited in terms of space.
I think if it's that popular, we'll either look to run a second one, or alternatively look to send out the recording, so at least you'll have the or be able to access the information.
And I think it's clear from these questions that the most important topic coming through is about the furloughed element, whether it's director or employees. So Andrew, John has asked, if a company director furloughs, can they still be paid expenses and or dividend top-up payments? And a secondary from David, who's related to Joe. So Edith, maybe you scoop up this, and I think there isn't really much of an answer we can give David, which is, where or to whom do we apply for grants? Because I think from my knowledge, we still don't know what the process is. But Andrew, if you could approach the John question and just cover off that I was right with the David one, or correct me.
Cool, thanks. So John, yes, dividend top-up payments you should be absolutely fine with, excuse me, because it's nothing to do with trading. Expenses is an interesting one. Because expenses are usually only incurred on behalf of the trade. if you're incurring the expense because it relates to something that you're trying to sell, it could be questioned whether you're actually furloughed or not. If it's an expense such as a confirmation statement, £13 to Companies House, I don't think there'd be an issue with that necessarily. But it all depends what the expense is for. As with any VAT return, tax return accounts that get submitted, HMRC are allowed to review and claim against anything, or review any claims that are made. So you do need to be a little careful with the expenses you claim. In principle, there's nothing wrong with it, but do be mindful of what the expense is for, and if what the expense is for would be classified as working from their point of view. As for grant funding, personally, I've been going on the basis that the local council, for instance, in Stafford, it would be the Stafford Borough Council. It'd be wherever you got the your rates bill from in terms of the small business grant fund, or there's an extra one for retail, hospitality and leisure. Those in particular, you can find out more about whether you're eligible or not for it from the local borough council. I believe that the Stafford Borough Council actually has a web link now on their website, so to be able to find it. But the short of it is, for those particular grants, the local council will be the ones that are divvying up the money across the businesses.
Thank you, Andrew. Edith, I'm going to throw this one your way. I think it's one question, but it's come in as 4 separate bits. So it's from Paul. I have some single director clients who have been given conflicting info around the coronavirus job retention scheme, and for those directors, how do you manage the balance between their fiduciary duties and promoting their company whilst being furloughed? The Companies Act 2006, section 172.3 talks about the promotion of their business, etc. How do you manage balancing the line between conducting business and designated furlough and remain compliant?
So that was a very detailed question there from Paul.
And I read it so very well.
It is very eloquently put there, Sally. It is the area at the moment that's in contention because we haven't got anything written from HMRC as yet. What we have got is someone from the Treasury, Ken Berry, who's from the Treasury, Ben Kerry, get my names mixed up there. He did a CBI webinar earlier on in the week, and he confirmed that directors will be able to be furloughed as long as they are only doing their statutory duties. Now, as Paul's alluded to, there is a section within the Companies Act for what the general duties comprise of. Now, one of their main duties is to promote the success of the company. Now, that would incur, in theory, to things like marketing and other such things to keep the business afloat whilst everyone's in shutdown. So in relation to that point 3, where there is marketing, in theory, you've still got that ability to promote your business, because you need to do it in the interest of your employees, in the interest of the business. So that functionality should be there, as long as you're not doing any revenue generating services, really. So at the moment, we're still waiting for 100% confirmation. We are hopeful that some legislation is getting released on that today, but it's not guaranteed. What I'd recommend is tuning in on Friday's webinar, because we're hoping by then something will be in writing from HMRC.
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to turn to Nick now, who sent some in advance, and also I think has put one the same on the Q&A. I'm going to address these to Andrew. So are the grants taxable, the 80% wages one and the 10k small business rates relief? And are furnished holiday lets included in the small business rates relief 10k grant because they've lost bookings due to coronavirus?
Yes, as far as we're aware, the incomes that you get through the grants, through the 80% job retention scheme, are all taxable. Now that sounds like you're getting potentially 80 or only 81% of the amount of money. However, the expense is also taxable. So if 80% of your wages are being paid by the government and you're paying 80% of your wages, there's no tax being payable in totality. So yes, it will form part of your accounts, and yes, it will form part of your profit. effectively it's in lieu of profit or in addition as a funding towards a cost. So although the income, it will be taxable, the expense it relates to will also be taxable. In regards to whether furnished holiday lets will be included, that is an interesting one because furnished holiday lets are in theory a business. I would probably suggest on that front to talk to the local council. It's the local council that will be divvying up the money that the government are giving them. Again, I would probably direct you to the council tax bill that you've had and whether it's had on that small business rate relief or not. Just because you don't pay business rates doesn't mean that you may not get the grant. It's whether you actually receive that relief or the taper relief or the rural relief as well. If you receive any of those off of your bill, then that's the important thing. So potentially going back to either the bill and or the council, they said that they'd start divvying up the money in April. So at some point over the next couple of weeks, I would say. But I know the Stafford Borough Council have definitely started putting stuff on their website. So depending which part of the country your furnished holiday lets in, probably going to them would be the starting point.
And there's a secondary question to that point, Andrew, also from Nick. So he's got the 10k small business rates relief, whether it's relevant for the holiday let, but he also understands that there's a 10,000k grant for hospitality. Would he be able to claim both, or would it be one or the other?
Interesting. It would be more than likely, I believe this is per property. So it's not actually based per business. So with that in mind, if you're getting small business rates relief and you're not in one of those three, then 10 grand grants are available. If it's under £15,000 as your rateable value and you are in retail, hospitality or leisure, you'll still only receive £10,000. I believe it's one or the other. I don't think it's both. The guidance on it hasn't been completely easy to follow, but that's our assumption on it. If your rateable value is actually over between 16 grand and £51,000, and you are in the retail, hospitality or leisure industries, shops, pubs, estate agents, letting agents, then in theory you can actually claim the 25k grant.
Thank you. A couple of questions which I think are interlinked, so I'm going to pose them separately, but I think that part of the answer will fit both. So Joe has said, if there are two directors, can we furlough one of us and the other continue to work? And then Nick has said, we are two director employees. We have to do emergency maintenance to the property, so one of us must be on call. So does that mean just one can be furloughed, and can dividends be taken into account for that person's income?
Who are you posing that to, Sally?
Oh, that would be a good one. Andrew, sorry, I'm going to come to you.
Okay, so in regards to the second point, furloughed employees will only, furloughed directors will only get their salary. It's not dividends. So any dividends that you need to take out will not be covered by the 80%. One director can furlough in theory, and the other one can be working. There is nothing against that. Again, it's just coming back to, we need clarity on what exactly they mean by whether something, what a director does is deemed to be furloughed work or normal work. What was the first question? Sorry, Sally.
It was, can we furlough one director and the other one continues to work?
Oh, there we are.
Yeah, I thought they were interlinked. So you don't need to say any more, Andrew. Thank you. And Edith, do the government pay furloughed staff through payroll direct to staff?
No, it doesn't come direct to staff. It'll go to the employer first, who will have, in theory, already paid the staff, so it's reimbursing at that point. Whether in future, if this continues for more than 3 months, whether they'll pay it in time for you to pay your staff so you've got that money straight away to divvy out, I don't know. We haven't got enough details as yet.
I would imagine, Edith, that they probably won't, purely from a fraud perspective, because anybody could say, oh, I'm furloughing my staff and I will pay them. I suppose they probably want evidence through the payroll that you have physically paid them. That would be my theory.
Very true.
Okay, Edith, I have a staff member on 3 months self-isolation. What will their entitlement be?
So if they're on self-isolation, haven't been sent home from lack of work, they are in this grey area, really. Technically, if they're self-isolating due to having any of the symptoms, then it's statutory sick pay, but that's only 2 weeks that's paid by HMRC. I'd have to look more into that offline. because I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I don't know whether anybody else has a suggestion to that, but my instinct is if they're self-isolating rather than being told there's no work, then they're not furloughable because they're already self-isolating beforehand.
Edith's right. As far as I'm aware, it's statutory sick pay, and then if they try to return and there's no work, then they can become furloughed. It's not ideal because certainly the amount of money they're bound to get through statutory sick pay, even from day one, is likely going to be the £94.25 a week. But I think Edith's completely right on what we currently know. Whether that changes or not in the upcoming days remains to be seen. But as it currently stands, statutory sick pay, and after she stops self-isolating, if she can't return to work because there's no work, furloughing.
Okay, thank you. Coming to the end of questions, should you be expected to guarantee loans personally?
That's a very interesting one. So the government are supporting banks, or so we thought until Laura's thing from NatWest there. The interesting thing about it is governments are only supporting the losses that banks make. The loan is still as if it was any other loan that you went to the bank for. So the company's still going to owe 100% of the amount that's borrowed. The government will only pay the interest for the first 12 months. The idea being that it was going to turn people who were previously refused a loan, in effect having the government as a guarantor of sorts on the losses the bank will make, but it is don't be in any sort of disregard that it's actually in 100% of the liability is that of the companies and will be due.
Okay. More questions have come in. Edith, if a director is furloughed from 13th March, but there is the prospect of some work for the business on 5th of April onwards, achieving the minimum 3 weeks required, can the director do the work and still comply with CJRS?
Yeah, so the CJRS is the abbreviation for the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, just for those that hadn't clicked what the abbreviation was there. So yeah, they're doing the 3 week minimum furloughing period, so I'd imagine so. And then they could do that job, and then if there's no more jobs, go to being furloughed again.
Okay, brilliant.
The only thing you might want to just be careful of is, I suppose, when that work came in and whether there was communication in regards to that work during the period of furloughing. Because hypothetically, people who are being furloughed are doing absolutely no work for the company during that time, other than the statutory requirements, to the extent that we know it. So I suppose that's the only thing to be aware of.
Laura, I think you
throwing spanners in works, basically.
Laura, I think you covered this in your presentation, but just confirm, if you're furloughed, can you do temporary work as well, like in a supermarket? That was from Nick.
So I believe you can do voluntary work, and hypothetically, so this is one of the things that I read, but it was from nowhere official, but where that was effectively discussing, if you were furloughed from one employment, could you carry on in work in another employment? So one of the rules with the furloughs is if this limit of the £2,500 maximum is per employment. So hypothetically, I don't see any reason why not. And certainly I think if it's doing it for the good of the country at this particular time, then it sounds to me like the government would support it. But probably there's a bit more information still to come out in that regard.
Okay, I'm struggling because some people are using chat for questions as well as Q&A. Jackie said you run our payroll for us. Can you run the furlough scheme for us?
Yes, of course, albeit we don't know quite how yet, because I think Edith will probably correct me, but I believe there's going to be a portal available to do the furloughing scheme, but that's not going to be available until mid to late April, I believe. So yes, we will, but I don't know practicalities of that just yet.
Okay, Edith, do I need to formally write to inform employees re-furloughing? Is there a template?
Yes, you will need to formally notify your employees. There needs to be a variation to the contract. Again, I would highly recommend viewing our webinar that we're holding, because there'll be a HR specialist. Is that the way to word it, Laura? Apologies for lack of terminology.
Yeah.
But I've already had a brief conversation with him today. A variation in contract is required. We don't have templates available as such, but he's certainly able to assist as and where. There probably are templates available online, but we wouldn't recommend necessarily using them in case they contradict any contracts that are in place. But yes, variations required to be able to pay the 80%.
Lovely. I don't know who to address this to, so I'm going to ask the question. I'm going to ask for somebody to step in if they can answer it. I've applied for universal credit as the only option for my situation. I've been given a timeline for payment, but have not been able to make an appointment. I guess it would be a phone conversation. It was mentioned on a COVID-19 programme that due to the amount of people applying, they would phone us. Do you know what the right procedure is?
Okay, so I will take that one. The only information that I know is from Martin Lewis, who's possibly where you're getting this COVID-19 programme from. So he's the money saving experts owner. He's been really vocal about everything that's going on, and he's tweeting quite a lot. And he has said in one of his recent tweets that he's aware universal credits are pretty jammed at the moment, and that they are taking messages and they are calling people back. There's just a backlog going on. So if you've been advised that they are going to call back, I would suggest that you wait for that call, because just calling them constantly, you're just going to be in the same position. I'm not a specialist in universal credits, but it is the information that I've seen online as well.
And Pascal has come on and said it was, I believe, the Martin Lewis that she saw. And then the final question, forgive me if there's any there, I think there might have been a couple of questions, but I think they were covered off within others. Paul, in regards to employee furlough, what's your view of on payroll before 2802 for starters in February? Does this mean a completed RTI through payroll or contracted during February, especially for late starters in Feb who may have missed the Feb payroll run but were contracted?
Am I taking that one? Apologies.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure, sorry. So it's an interesting question. Technically, when you're doing an RTI report, you put a start date in for the employee. So if you were planning on paying them in February, but their start date is the 27th of February, then technically they are on the payroll before the 28th. They obviously haven't been paid at that stage, and there is provisions in place for team and staff that were paid a small amount in February. It hasn't fully been released, so we don't know for definite, but I'd imagine you are going to be slightly protected as long as that RTI report went in with a start date before the 28th of February. But you do need to make sure that there's things in place that they were working on that, you know, on the 28th of February, and not just fraudulently putting a different start date.
Okay, and then I think I've got my final question, but that didn't work yesterday. As soon as I said that, another one came in. But so Nigel said, has the rule book changed for universal credit, or do the terms around exclusion if you have a partner still in work or savings of 16k apply?
My understanding is, I don't know too much about the universal credit system. I did have a brief look earlier on today, and it was still showing those exclusions. So I'm afraid it's not a massively useful answer, but I think certain elements of that certainly do still apply. I think the only change they have made, and please excuse me for forgetting this, I think, do they normally have some sort of provision where they look to see if you're trying to get work or something, minimum income levels or something, and I believe that element of it they've put a hold on during the coronavirus pandemic. I will find the wording of what those changes are, and we'll get that answer for you, Nigel, in the Q&A section that will be sent around after the presentation and the briefing.
Brilliant.
Aha.
Okay.
Sorry, on a side note, I do know that the 16k savings is still applicable. So if you've got 16,000, then you are still not able to claim, from what I last heard.
Oh, right. Pascal has actually answered Nigel's question. So she's come back to say, I can help. That I had to do a joined application, and there is an £8,000 to £16,000. So I have no idea what that means.
I think that means basically the savings element of it still applies.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I want to draw things to a conclusion. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for being on the call today. We know your time is precious, so we're thankful that you've turned up. I think you can see by the amount of questions that were generated, there's an awful lot still not conclusive, and that's where we're here to try and help, and we keep pushing to get more information, disseminate what it's actually saying, and trying to get it out to everybody in much more clearly defined terms. We've had along the way an awful lot of comments coming through on our chat line to say how valuable this has been, and have said thank you. We would really like your feedback. If you could drop an email to anybody who you have the email address to. If you don't have a regular contact, you can do it to clientservices@carthayaccountants.co.uk. Without your feedback to know how we're doing with these webinars, we won't know how we need to then structure the future one. So if I could ask for that, that would be really, really helpful. I'd also like to pass on my thanks to Laura, Edith and Andrew for one, presenting, and two, fielding what has been upward of 40 questions, which I think is an awful lot in the 40 minutes that we've had available to us. I'd also like to say, from a Carthay Accountants point of view, this has been a particularly challenging time. I believe we've risen to the challenge. We got our team remoted probably before any other accountancy practice in Stafford. From a very, very base start, we managed to get all the IT in place. We got everybody safe and well. We're now working remotely very, very efficiently, despite 1-year-olds, 3-year-olds and everything else. And we've done that with our main man down. So I sort of just say to you, stay safe from your family's health point of view. And please be assured that we will be here. We will be supporting you as businesses as much as we can. Please talk to us. Please keep in touch. Really, really important. And thank you once again for your time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.